There have been a number of things he strongly influenced me on. I think I'll mention only three to keep the part of this very short. One has been referred to already today. That was the business of I call it turnover frequency. It had a different name then, but he drew my attention to that. I once published a paper in which I gave a turnover frequency for hydrogenation of acetylene on palladium in terms of number of palladium atoms, the total number, not the proper area. Well, he got me impressed with that, so I started doing that. Another thing, he made an unpleasant remark to me once, which made me reform. That was where he claimed I'd written a large amount of various work, and I gave just one sentence of what the catalyst was, and that one sentence was that I bought it commercially. And after that, after he made me worry about that, after that I made all my catalysts. I never used another commercial catalyst. And so the third thing was a matter that was also referred to this morning by somebody who gave a talk. It was involved between Buttar and a man who gave a talk this morning on something. Well, what you talk on this morning was, in any case, there was a talk by Buttar, a paper by Buttar and Sachtler on how if you let a catalyst get dirty, awful things can happen. And the temperature of 300 degrees in oxygen will clean it up. And this led me later to be very careful. And I got almost finally paranoid. However, so that I have, even though I've never been a formal student, I still have it. Now, at that point, we now progress to someone else who has never been formally a student either. And that is Wolfgang Sachtler, and who the paper is by himself, D.D. Lay, E.P. Wong, L. Shu, and D.L. Sholovenko. And the title is Electron Deficient Metal Constitution. Welcome.
Thank you. Yesterday, I had the impression of being an intruder in a kind of family reunion, but I think this just increases my gratitude to the organizers that they apparently recognize me as a friend of this family, and certainly as an admirer of the head of the family. I'm very grateful that I can be here. Most people yesterday could start by reminding the audience of their first meeting with Michel. I won't do that. I will rather allude to a discussion which we had in 1974 in the Shinkansen when we went both from Tokyo to Kyoto to attend the Iwa conference. But in order to understand this discussion, I should perhaps just refresh the memory of the audience of some parts of European history. In 1815, the Congress of Vienna started to redraw the map of Europe, and in doing so, they created a new kingdom. They called it the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and it was just north of France. And the objective was strategic, to have a counterweight against any future plan of expansion. Well, that was a rather good foresight because the territory is identical with what we now call the Benelux. But the people involved were not asked about their opinion, and not everybody was so happy with that artificial and forced marriage between two parts. The northern part had been a free republic for almost 2 centuries, the Republic of the United Provinces. The southern part had been, during that time, Spanish, and then inhabited by the Austrian themselves united with that northern part, which to make things worse was Protestant, the south was Catholic, and a king had to be found, and he was Protestant. So that marriage was not so very happy from the very beginning. And there were some tensions, and finally in 1830, what they understand in August, a spark ignited the powder keg, and that was an opera performance. The only revolution I know of in history which was initiated by an opera performance. The opera was the La Muette and there were a lot of slogans about freedom, and the people left the opera building and were singing and repeating that, and that led to the secession and led to the creation of a new kingdom called Belgium, and the knight Prince of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to become king of Belgium. Since that time, the relation between the Dutch and the Belgians remind me a little bit of the relations between the British and the Americans. A lot of commonality and unfortunately prevailing. This Benelux actually is the nucleus for the present European Union, but also some memory of that divorce. And when Michel and I were in the Shinkansen, traveling along the Fukuyama and talking about catalysis, I made a horrible faux pas. I mentioned the certain ideas about which were at that time modeled in the Dutch school of catalysis. And his eyes went wide open. Ça n'existe pas. I really saw in his eyes La Muette Portici. This year, a month ago, I was at a meeting in the Netherlands where they celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Dutch society. A book was at that occasion, and so although it may not exist, it does have a written history. And I have the privilege of being asked by my friend Wolfgang Sachtler to bring one copy of the book with his
Should I sing? Thank you.
Now, what was it what the Dutch School of Catalysis united, so to speak? It was in the 50s and the 60s, basically the ideas that the electronic factor concept was probably simplified by people who used it just when they didn't understand things, and we felt we should come back to the facts. Chemistry, bonds are formed in catalysis and bonds are broken, and that's what you should understand. It was therefore a little bit hitting our raw nerve when in 1972 these two gentlemen here published a paper on platinum and zeolites where they said that everything happens as if our small platinum clusters are electron efficient, maybe as a result of partial electron transfer from platinum to the zeolite, and the clusters behave like iridium, the element to the left of platinum. So there we were back in the days of alchemy, that one element was transmutated into another element by just stealing an electron. So this intrigued us, and many years later, when I was already at Northwestern under the supervising eye of our chairman, we did some work. And the first question, of course, is can it be true that electrons are transferred to an insulator, as the United States insulator? How can you park electrons to an insulator? Now, the question before that, are the facts true? Of course they are. These are the data. So, for instance, for the neopentane conversion, the active here So we tried to see whether there is any generality of that principle, used palladium, and lo and behold, the turnover frequency increases TOF when you have the same palladium on the zeolite rather than the silica. But it also showed that it depends on the history. Now, usually we bring the metals into the zeolite by first ion exchanging, then calcining, and then fusing with hydrogen. And here is the calcination temperature. So if you calcine the palladium, which is originally a tetramine ion, at high temperature you have the naked ion, and when you reduce it, you make, of course, two protons. If you have the calcination temperature limited, that you just always evaporated, that much of the alien ligands of the palladium remain still intact, then you do not create so many photons, and that is the sequence which seemed to occur. So we said if it is correct that the platinum of palladium in this case is electron deficient, then we have at least some idea which element accepts the electrons. It's not just the zeolite lattice, but perhaps it's the protons. So we started thinking in terms of cartoon, said when you reduce the metal and the agglomeration of the zeolite, you reduce the ion hydrogen, then you put protons, that's the stoichiometry, and they either can be completely separated or they can form some kind of adder, or they can completely leave that surface. Now, first we want to know, is it some generality? It's easy to say by stealing an electron from palladium, it becomes like rhodium. What happens to rhodium if you steal an electron? Now, lo and behold, by doing in the zeolite, you get again an increase in turnover frequency, and again a radius of slope which is smaller. So the principle still works, but does that mean now that this electron acceptor, it can be supposed to be the photon, or what is actually going on? Well, try to imagine what happens when you reduce a metal ion. When you have ions in a zeolite and you reduce the ions with hydrogen, you can imagine, of course, that the electron, the ion becomes an individual atom, and you have the two protons, so that the negative charge remains compensated. And this is a reduction in the electrochemical sense, and of course it requires also the requirement to satisfy what you find by TPR. But TPR only tells you what hydrogen is consumed, so you could also imagine that in fact the hydrogen atoms do not completely depart, but remain somehow intact or in interaction with the ion which they have reduced, and then electronegativity requires that still it's a conglomerate of the three atoms that should be positive, but the charge should be somehow distributed, and you could call that electron deficient. Now, if that is true, that the metal is behaving, that's what basically assumes like a Lewis base interacting with the protons, then you should be able to destroy that and displace the proton by absorbing something which is more strongly absorbed. And of course, carbon monoxide is a possibility. And what we see, this is here XFs and the Fourier transform. If we have palladium under a certain set of conditions in zeolite, and if we then add CO at 21 degrees, which is room temperature in the Chicago area, then you see the particles get bigger. So that lends some credence to the idea that you have a proton adduct which serves as an anchor, and if you just cut the chain of the anchor, displace the proton, the palladium particles can, of course, migrate, and the bigger thermodynamic single phosphide writing, of course, leads to agglomeration. You can, of course, also agglomerate by heating at higher temperature, but that is trivial. And if that is the correct interpretation, you can again use that as a cartoon. Are your original palladium particles with the protons. Now you add the CO displaces the proton and the things migrate and you get a bigger particle. And some of the protons are anchors which lost their ship. So they should show up in the infrared as OH bands. And that's exactly what happens. The intensity of the OH band increases. These are just the differential curves when you do this. And so the particles migrate until they reach the size which is limited by the window size of the zeolite. In this case, it seems to be a 13 atom thing like that. And so the whole genesis then consists of the following chapters. You start with the ion exchange. You can destroy the amine ions completely and place them to the small cages, or not you reduce them, and when you get the proton, then they migrate and you get the 13 atom particle case. And that's a very interesting cluster because it gives an infrared spectrum which has very sharp bands, and you can identify them. There are the triple bridging, there are double bridging butterfly, linear CO. And the interesting thing about the spectrum is if you then start carefully to remove the CO at a relatively low temperature, just by blowing argon and helium over it, then the bands not only decrease as was expected, but new bands appear, and very sharp isospectral points separate the new spectrum from the old spectrum. So it looks as if we now reverse this spectrum. There were originally proton bonds to the palladium, then we had displaced the proton with CO, and the particles had migrated. Now, when we remove some of the CO, again, protons can take the ligand positions which are free, and so the spectrum might be interpreted as that of the mixed ligated thing, where now language becomes a bit difficult. In the complex chemistry, we talk about hydrido carbonyls. We have just called it proton. We know, of course, it is neither a proton nor a hydride ion. In fact, the dipole moment is quite weak, but it is the positive end of the dipole moment, which we mean when we use in this linguistic stenography the word proton. And when you do that, you see indeed that again the intensity of the OH band decreases, and if you add CO again, it increases again. You can play yo-yo, so these protons are connected with the palladium apparently, but can be displaced with the CO. So all of that is rather consistent. However, you never succeed in convincing your inorganic colleagues about that. All this evidence will never be sufficient answer to the question, well, if that it were true that protons and metals can interact, it should have been found in inorganic chemistry, it should have been found in solution. And so this not invented here syndrome was rather frustrating for a long time, until last year. There was a strike of luck. There appeared a paper in the Chemical Society of a group who found exactly what all the time we had been wishing somebody would find. They have carbonyl complexes, for instance, of iridium and other metals, rhodium, cobalt, and these complexes have two carbonyls and further the substituted cyclopentadienyl, and they find that these complexes do interact with the positive end of acid alcohols. when you give when you add to the solution some of these fluorinated alcohols, which have a high acidity, then the new bands appear shifted depending on which alcohol and also temperature. I have summarized their data. It is a table which shows for the two bands they always shift to higher frequency when they are interacting with these fluorinated alcohols. The fluorinated alcohols have OH frequency, which are very similar to the OH frequency in the zeolites, or what we call protons and zeolites. They are just OH groups. And you see you have here a variety of solvents, some rather unusual one as liquid xenon and krypton and the supercritical xenon. And these are the various alcohols fluorinated to a various extent. And these are the shifts which are always positive to higher frequency, and these are the known pKa values for alcohols. So here it is quite clear that the lower the pKa, that means the higher the acidity of the alcohol, the higher is the frequency shift. So this is totally unbiased by catalysis. I doubt whether these people even have ever heard about Michel Tudor, although it seems possible to do so. And they clearly arrive at this conclusion. The iridium, in this case, acts like a Lewis acid, Lewis base, and interacts with these protons. Again, if you think in terms of formal valencies, this is rather unheard of, because in the way how electrons usually are bookkeeping is done in organic chemistry, this acetyldienol is an anion. So this iridium is a cation. So here we have a cation formally, which attracts a proton formally. So the reality of the interaction, of course, means that the formal charge is not the real charge. We know that. Just to continue about this literature work, which we are happy, they even found when they went to these very extraordinary solvents like liquid xenon and krypton that a second complex appears. So far I have talked about these two bands, which then are shifted with some of these fluorinated alcohols. These bands here again. And now there is a second satellite arriving, which they then describe the formation of an adduct with two of these alcohols on either side of the cation, the transition metal cation, the iridium, which is shown here symbolically. Now, if that is correct, that the OH band, the proton of these acidic alcohols interacts in this way with metal atoms, then you should expect also some effect on the OH frequency. That should be in the opposite direction, should be weaker. And indeed, that is also found for all these three metals of paper. But the band becomes very, very broad, and in the case of rhodium, which we had mainly looked for, so weak, so that we have to use that as an excuse while we have not been able in our zeolites to find the shifted now to the lower frequencies, lower wave number, shifted OH bands, although we are looking very hard for it. The only thing we see is always that a new OH band, a new intensity is added to the H band if somehow we destroy the adduct by displacing the OH groups or the protons from the zeolite. We never found that band, but if they tend to be so broad, this may be just experimentally impossible. The interaction means that the metal now becomes electron deficient, as Michel and Wolfgang said, that can be proven directly if you use XPS, which was not available in 1972 when they published their trend-setting paper. Here are a number of these lines with palladium HY. You have the highest shift when you have palladium sodium Y, which you reduce and create a proton. You have also a shift, but it is not so much. If you kill the protons by chemical means, for instance, adding ammonia, then you go to this position, which is still not the same as bulk palladium, so one could, in a naive manner, argue that difference is due to the size, but these differences here are due to the electron deficiencies due to the total energy. The same story can also be told when we use the Auger parameter and instead of the XPS, and one can give a formal valency to the palladium by using these shifts. So the whole genesis of metal in a zeolite it starts after ion exchange as an ion. When you have chased these ions to the small cages of the Y zeolite, and you start reducing. Think of our cartoon of the 3 atomic ensemble, then you say they must have a total charge of 2 plus, and it seems to be distributed formally 1 plus on the palladium and 1/2 plus on each of the protons. As soon as we chase them to the super cages, a higher temperature, then of course the electron efficiency in the average becomes smaller. We thought, naive as we are, for a long time that we had an equilibrium, that there were some palladium particles which are sitting on a proton and others which are not. If that were true, then you would find a sharp line that would neutralize the proton, and you would find 2 lines, or if we are closer, some merging of the 2 lines when there are protons. However, what you do find is when you increase the proton concentration is that the lines just shift, retaining their width, which suggests that we have a rather uniform situation, and the metal clusters interact with either 1 proton or with 2 protons or with 3 protons. And once we accept that this interaction is favorable, after all, this metal cluster has to interact with something when it's in the zeolite. It has a choice between the sodium ions, if there are some left, or the oxides ions of the glucose, or these OH groups which are called protons. So then if the last thing is the most favorable one, then they will, of course, migrate to positions where they have as many as possible of them. Now, if that is a real chemical interaction, as it seems to be, then that should have some effects on the dispersion, and it really has. The electron microscopy is the most convincing evidence. When you may have seen this before. So if we have a reduced palladium in some zeolite used at low temperature, then the palladium particles are all but invisible, although these arrows have been drawn by somebody else for imagination than effects. If you take the same one and you kill the protons by adding ammonia, then you see the particles at the same temperature, reduce at the same temperature as you had reduced before. So apparently these protons help to anchor the palladium. One can also see that during catalytic reactions, when you have reactants which will react with protons, in particular those organic molecules which have tertiary carbon atoms, which very easily form tertiary carbenium ions. They immediately react and H2 is formed. And the carbenium ion, of course, is not such a good anchor. So then the particles immediately grow, as you see here, with methyl cyclopentane. When you do the same thing with cyclopentane, which has only secondary carbon atoms, and therefore much less tendency to form carbenium ions, the sintering is much lower. So electron deficiency and proton anchoring seem to be related. When we talk about these particle sizes, I have so far only used electron microscopy because that's the cautious way. The conventional way of measuring particle sizes is, of course, hydrogen adsorption. However, when you have these very small clusters, 1 or 2 or 4 atoms sitting on protons, they do not absorb hydrogen anymore. The data here show that going into details that with increasing production temperature, for instance, you would of course expect the dispersion to simply decrease, but you see it actually goes, if you take the hydrogen absorption as the dispersion to a maximum, and also if you measure at the same sample the dispersion of the metal by 2 methods, either the hydrogen absorption or XFs, then it's obvious that for these small particles, the 2 methods do not agree anymore. Here is virtually no XF signal. Here is a big signal. Obviously, these particles must be bigger than those one, but these particles absorb more hydrogen from vanadium than those one. So these proton add up, these very small particles can absorb hydrogen, and the hydrogen absorption ceases to be a reliable tool for metal dispersion. Now that gave us then the coverage to do the last step and try to prepare isolated platinum atoms. There is one statement of results in the literature that there is no evidence of synthesis also for isolated metal atoms in any support, and so this remains a challenge. Can you create them by using these tricks? And what we did was that we used mordenite, where you have, of course, these side pockets which are geometrically very favorable. And if you use mordenite in the H form, then you should, if ever, have a chance. And we found with platinum evidence, which is very suggestive that we really have now isolated platinum, isolated from each other, of course, connected via the protons to the zeolite. I don't want to bore you at this time with the evidence. Just one, the catalytic signature is of course very different from normal platinum. One thing which Vladimir Jalavenko found, which I find very convincing, if you look at the infrared spectrum of absorbed carbon monoxide. We all know for normal particles, when you have a high coverage, the COs, the neighboring COs, have dipole-dipole coupling, and that leads to a certain shift in the band position. So when you desorb the CO, you get that this here, that the band shifts while the intensity goes down. That's what everybody has always found for normal platinum. But when you have these isolated platinum, that is completely different. Now, there are no more neighbors, so there is no dipole-dipole coupling. So the thing is there or it is not there, there is no third possibility. So here you see when you remove the CO, the band intensity goes down without any shift and without any change in line with the remains of short spike. I like to summarize this. We do fully agree there are electron deficient metal clusters, but we see them as the interaction of the metal acting as a Lewis space, and the protons in the zeolite acid protons. I quoted this work on the homogeneous clusters where the same phenomenon has been found and studied in the infrared frequency, both of these CO ligands for which the band goes up and the OH, which is perturbed, which goes down. And they can, I have not talked about this bifunctional catalysis, that the proton adduct is of course simultaneously an acid site and a metal site. So what conventionally is done by shuttling the Mills mechanism between different sites can be done during one residence. I hope I have convinced you that the adduct formation needs the fatty atoms. And I would, before I leave, thank all those who have cooperated and helped with getting these results over the years. And you can read their names, and we know some of them personally. And my acknowledgement to the person who indirectly inspired me to this work, and that is Wolfgang. Who did that so often, so also with this challenging paper in 1972. He still throws his shadow over this work, and I want to thank you very much for that, and I thank you for your attention.
Other questions? Been very convincing.
Oh boy.
No, sure it wasn't boring, but it's not difficult to. I'll just mention one thing. Would you put that last slide on? There's a contribution Professor Sachtler made out of science. Sounds really great if you're a scientist.
With the acknowledgement.